Hey guys, Ken Michaels here. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks to all of you who have subscribed to my new channel. I'm very excited about doing all this work and interviewing people in the Beatle world, which is what I've been doing for almost 40 years now. I have a special guest with me this time, and he goes all the way back to my days on New Jersey radio in the 80s when I was on WDHA 105.5, the Rock of New Jersey. And he was a special guest back then. You know him for his years in the band Elephant's Memory, where he played bass. And he was with John and Yoko, working for them, recording with them, performing with them for several years there. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you a good friend of mine and to us all, Gary Vanciock. Hi, Gary.
Thank you, Ken. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I can't believe it's been since the 80s that we started our interview series, or whatever you want to refer to it as. It's crazy.
Yeah, I had you on my radio show then. I had you on my podcast. No, not my podcast. I had you on my syndicated show. I had you on my website, and now you're on my YouTube page.
This is the new stuff. We're really up to date here, aren't we?
Yeah. Who knows where we'll be in a couple years? Some new
learning
gadget.
about Zoom.
Anyway, I thought we'd talk this time out. We're going to do a two-part interview because there's so much to cover with all that you did with John and Yoko and Elephant's Memory. And I thought we'd talk about mainly the Sometime in New York City album and the album where you backed up Yoko, which is my favorite of all of her albums, approximately.
Mine as well.
Okay. And before we do that, for the casual fan or for the new Beatle fan or new John Lennon fan that don't know the history of Elephant's Memory, in just a minute or two, can you kind of summarize when the band started and when you joined?
Sure, the band goes back all the way to 1967, maybe even 66, formed by our saxophonist Stan Bronstein and drummer Rick Frank. There was also another original member. His name was Myron Mules, Y-U-L-E-S, and he was a bass trombone player, which set the stage for their later larger horn section on the Buddha record, which I'll explain about. They had the first electric horns in the music business.
Wow.
Electric horns didn't even survive, but they were innovators of that, and the first band, as far as I know, to have electric horns. And this is 1968. When they first started out, they had a singer, Martha Velez. I don't know whether you've ever heard of Martha or any of our listeners have heard of her. She was in the original Hair.
Oh, okay.
Went on to have a huge television actress, million shows, Law and Order, this and that. She became very successful. Martha left the band to do her solo career after she found out she was accepted in Hair and started on Broadway with that. Everybody wanted to work with her back in those days. I'll make this quick. Eric Clapton, Nick V from Fleetwood Mac, on and on and on. The people on her first album was the who's who of New York and the music business, basically. But she didn't last long because the band really didn't have anything really going on besides everybody wanted to be in the band. So they hired Carly Simon as their replacement to Martha. And Carly was in the band for about, I don't know, maybe 8-9 months before they decided to move on. She wanted a solo career as well. And of course, it was just a couple of years later in 71, she got the Grammy for the Best New Artist. So Carly would come back and visit us once in a while when we were doing sessions with John. I think she got a kick out of it that, her old band was doing well again. And,
there never were any recordings made with Carly, right? With Elephant's Memory?
No, not that I know of. If they were, they would have been demos with Wes Farrell. Wes Farrell was the producer that got Elephant's Memory involved with Midnight Cowboy.
Wow.
And in '68, I was actually signed to Wes Farrell. His publishing company was Pocket Full of Tunes. And Wes Farrell later, just a few, maybe a year later or so, assembled the Partridge Family. So
how well I know.
Just an amazing producer. And so
Great
that was the
songwriter.
early band, including bassist John Ward. John had been in a band called the Blues Doctors with Danny Adler. Now, Danny Adler was a huge guitar player back at that time. This is all before your time, my friend. Danny Adler played with John Lee Hooker, T-Bone Walker, Solomon Burke. He was a huge blues guitar player back in that day. He went on to play with Rocket 88 later on, like 1980, with Charlie Watts, Jack Bruce was in that band, Rocket 88. So Danny Adler went on for a couple of decades there as a little underground blues guitar player. So their bassist John Ward was involved in they wrote Jungle Jim at the Zoo and Old Man Willow for the Midnight Cowboy. And that was in '69. It won the Oscar, 3 Oscars actually. And they got a nice gold record from that. They wrote those 2 tunes, and not too many people know that Tony Visconti was really tight with Stan and Bronstein and Rick Frank. Stan and Tony were both from Brooklyn, so they were like childhood friends. They may have even been in the Navy band together at one point. But anyway, everybody knows Tony went on to produce Bowie and
Moody Blues,
T-Rex. I mean, we could go on and on and on, but Tony's a good friend. He was really tight with Stan and always was around at our gigs at Max's or whatever, when he wasn't in England doing all of his great things with Bowie. But I just posted a picture the other day that I got off Tony's website it was from England, and there was Stan Bronstein, Myron Mules, the trombone player, the original people that started Elephant's Memory, and it was Tony and his family, his mom and dad, and there was this little guy, looked like a little kid, sitting on the chair and beside of Tony, and it was David, a young David Bowie.
Wow.
So Elephants were connected to all that early stuff, Mark Bolan and T-Rex and all that stuff. It was actually, the picture was taken in England. I hadn't even realized that Stan and Rick had even been over to England and hung out with Tony back then. But it was one big happy family, apparently. And it was great to see him from time to time. He was always around, as I mentioned, and the last time I saw him, one of the last times, was at the benefit concert we had for Stan Bronstein. He had gotten cancer, and we had this big benefit for him at Manny's Car Wash in New York, and Tony was there and played bass, which was great to see him playing. And he was a tremendous musician, as still is. He played tuba when he was in high school and all this stuff. Just a great bass player, great guy. But those recordings that Elephants did with that ended up on Midnight Cowboy, the record, had been on their Buddha record, the label Buddha. Those songs, so they had a Naked on the Cover, first Naked on the Cover album on Buddha. That was actually called Elephant's Memory as well, just Elephant's Memory title. And that was in '69. And that was actually Midnight Cowboy was the first X-rated movie to win an Academy Award, I believe, as well. So a lot of firsts going on there. First Naked on the Cover album on Buddha. That's when I started noticing them. They would have gigs in in the Village Voice being advertised, and they kind of were slowly taking over New York at that point. And that's when I auditioned. It was about 1970, early 1971. Just
Okay.
when I came into the picture. I don't want to get too out there on all their history, but it's quite an interesting history. That's one of the things that drew me to the band was a lot of people in town really wanted to play with them, and everybody was raving about their live performances. So that's I went to basically a cattle call in the Village Voice. There must have been 60, 70 bass players show up, and but I think they had been scouting me a little bit because I was doing studio work in Manhattan at that time, and had been in a band called Pig Iron on Columbia Records. And I think they had heard about me, and it was a small little scene back in New York City as far as a studio musician went in those days. I was with a thing called Radio Registry back then, is how you got your gig. You called in every morning in the Radio Registry with the producers, would hook up with them, and they'd schedule your jingles for the day or whatever. I used to do Uncle Ben's rice and Porsche commercials, and that was my day, you know.
You don't have any recordings of those jingles, do you? That you played on?
I actually heard there was this a special on TV about a decade ago. They were citing old commercials just for goofs, and I did hear an Uncle Ben's rice commercial that I played on. That was kind of a thrill, but none of that stuff is used anymore.
Right.
The whole fun about it was going to the Union, Local 802, and picking up your checks every couple of weeks because they paid big time residuals. So I was actually making pretty big money for the early 70s just doing jingles. That was my thing. So really, I wanted to be in Elephant's memory because they were having so much fun. The jingle business was kind of boring. You know, you went in and did your thing every day, all day long, and there really wasn't too much of a reward for it. You were done by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So, you know, you wanted to go out at night and let it hang out and stuff and jam and stuff. So I wanted to get into a band that was a little bit more exciting, put it that way.
So their sound back then, would you define it as being more a garage band? Because that's kind of like the reputation that Elephant's Memory sort of has when you learn, you know, how John came to work with them, that he was looking for a more street sound, you know, raw, intense group. Is that how you would define their sound when you first joined them?
Well, I wouldn't say garage band. I mean, because, you know, when you say garage band, and you know, I think of, you know, players that are still working on their skills and may not be polished. That really wasn't the thing with Elephant's Memory. We were all doing studio work. We were all professional studio musicians. So I've probably mentioned this to you before, but I think where that came about was street band is because they were just into politics, basically. And we're doing a lot of the street protest kind of thing, and a lot of those gigs were outside Washington Square Park or whatever in New York, Central Park or whatever. So, but I think you know, John Lennon was interested in David Peel, and that was a street band right there. I mean, they never played anywhere else but on the street. So I think somehow we got looped in with the David Peel thing as a street band, but we basically very rarely played on the street. It was more like gigs at, you know, Max's Kansas City. We were one of the regular bands at Max's. We used to play the Village Gate, and I don't think too many street bands played the Village Gate. Bitter End, you know, the typical places back there. Folk City was one of our regular gigs. Used to have a million musicians come in and jam with us at Folk City. All the old haunts from, you know, on Bleecker Street and in the vicinity there.
So since John at the time and Yoko were in their very strong political period and writing political songs. And, getting into sometime in New York City, songs for John Sinclair, Angela Davis, Attica State. Were you guys in the band all pretty much simpatico with their political views?
Oh, very much so. Not me really personally. I was kind of a hick from Pennsylvania myself. I really wasn't into that stuff too much. They kind of got me into it,
Hmm.
but they were definitely into it. They were writing political songs. They wrote a couple of songs that we had a minor hit on Billboard and Cashbox called "Skyscraper Commando." There was, it was very political, but and their music, that particular record, "Skyscraper Commando," was banned right off the bat for, having the word dope in it by the FCC. So that was a sign of things to come. So we had to get a gig with John and get "Woman Is the You Know What" banned on the FCC. So we were definitely in their sights.
Yeah. So explain how you actually got the gig to back up John and Yoko.
Well, I think we were doing a live radio show out on Long Island called WLIR.
Sure.
It might still be there, I've been told. Country station now, I think. But in those days, they would take bands and bring them in and let them play live and broadcast like half-hour, 45-minute shows and this and that. So we got booked on that, and Billy Joel was the opening act. We sat around and listened to, I didn't even know who he was until I had actually auditioned for him a couple of months before I auditioned for the Elephants. So didn't get the gig, and wasn't too impressed actually at the time. It was just his manager and him playing organ, and he was looking for bass. But anyway, we went to Long Island to do that show. We did our set, about 35-minute set, and in those days, as you know, they would record it for the band on a 7.5 reel-to-reel, and then give you a cassette copy at the end. So we performed, and I got my little cassette and took it home. Everybody got a copy, and maybe a week went by, and I got a phone call that John and Yoko were interested in the band, and I was in shock. I mean, how did this happen? How could this possibly be?
Yeah.
And then I found out that one of our political friends, Jerry Rubin, had got a copy of that cassette and gave it to John and Yoko, and they loved it. They thought we were tremendous. They had all the, as they said, apparently we had all the ingredients that they were looking for. They wanted to have someone who was in the Eric Clapton vein, and you couldn't ask for anybody better than that, than Wayne Tex Gabriel. And they loved sax, of course. Probably Bobby Keys was somebody they would be used to using, and they heard Stan Bronstein, and I mean, come on, Stan was he was the best in New York at that time. Everybody wanted to work with Stan, and therefore that's why he had a great recording career going on, starting as early as '68, really. He'd been doing everybody's records. Ended up playing with Aerosmith and countless others. But we loved the chance of getting the opportunity. It was very exciting, but I didn't really think it would happen still. I thought maybe, we'd maybe get to meet him or something. But so we, you just go on about your business. And we used to rehearse at this studio in the Village called Magna Graphics. It was on Bank Street, where John lives, just like 3 doors down or whatever. I would see John during the day on my way to rehearsal. Him and Yoko would be like, stopping shopping for food at the Korean deli up the block or whatever. I never really had the kahunas to go over and say, "Hey, it's me." So one night, to speed this up, we were rehearsing at Magna Graphics, and the roadies came running into the room and says, John and Yoko are out in the lobby and they want to meet. They want to come in and play. And we were in the middle of working on an original at the time, which we took very serious. We were trying to get tunes together for our next album. And they had just finished one on Metro Media Records, which had Mongoose on it.
Right.
So they had a hit, a bona fide hit. It was top 40 in Cashboard, Billboard and Cashbox, excuse me. And so after letting them wait in the lobby for a while, we actually let them come in when there they were, bigger in life. John had that white suit on from Abbey Road, and Yoko's hair was down to the floor almost. It was just an exciting moment. It's something I'll never forget. You know, even before we shook hands and met, you know, my knees were knocking because I didn't think I'd be that riled by it, but it was pretty cool.
Yeah. So what happened at that first meeting? Did he watch you?
We played every rock and roll song we knew. We went to, that must have been about 10:30 at night. We went to 5 a.m.
Wow.
Playing all the old rock and roll Chuck Berry songs. We played Dizzy Miss Lizzie, and as I said, Chuck songs, and we just had a ball. We played so long that even my fingers were starting to get sore, and John was getting blisters, I think, because he hadn't been playing for a while. Well, he had a kind of a big layoff there. I mean, playing out at least, where you get the real calluses. So at about 4:35 in the morning, you know, he looked over at us and said, I'd like to join your band. And we were just like dumbfounded, you know. It was like, this isn't happening. What is going on? This can't be. But after, you know, about another half hour of discussion, we got real and realized he was serious. And, you know, as I said, we were looking for a record deal, so we didn't know what to do with that. We had wanted to wind it up with Metro Media, and we're trying to prepare our next album, and we didn't really know where we were going at that point. So, which there's good from that and there's bad. So how do we work it out was the main discussion at that point. And will we be on Apple? Or will you help us find another label? Because Apple at that point wasn't in that great a shape starting out. You know, I mean, they were having their problems, and what's going to happen with that? And so he decided that Yoko piped up and said, let's do a merger, so it won't affect our careers and it won't affect yours. So knowing that a lot of people didn't even know who the hell we were, but I appreciated that. And so she got piped up again and said, let's wait a minute, Plastic Ono and Elephant's Memory, that spells poem. So that was the new, she got very excited at that point and had her little angle, you know, and on the side, she's taking down everybody's number, our numerology numbers. You know, she's working it. She's trying to get all the marketing stuff together, all starting out. We just met them a couple hours before.
That
she was amazing. She was she was incredible. That she just you could tell that it wasn't just John. It was them as a unit right off the bat. You know, they were working together. It was really cool.
That's something. How the word spelled that poem.
Yeah,
you could tell that it was all in the cards for you, I guess, once that happened.
It seemed that way. And when she started pointing this stuff out, and she was just amazing, and still is.
Okay. Now we're going to bounce around time-wise, but I want to specifically talk about the Sometime in New York sessions. And first of all, I do want to bring up the now departed Phil Spector and tell me what your memories are of him, because he is listed as a co-producer on the album. And I remember you telling me many years back that certainly to my ears anyway, Woman is the Nigger of the World kind of has his sound on it. And Can you say what else Phil worked on the album, because he wasn't there for the whole duration of the recording of it?
No, as I recall, Phil was only around 2-3 nights at the most
For the whole
before John.
album?
I'm sorry?
For the whole album?
Yeah, he wasn't. John just couldn't stand him. He was at that point in their relationship. They were like, that just a lot of friction. For whatever reason, I don't know exactly what all was behind that. But Phil, the first night is my first amazing memory, was him coming in and putting his silver pearl-handled revolver on the board with a huge bag of cocaine, and basically not even wanting to meet us, basically ignoring us.
Huh.
Like, like we were some low street musicians, like we weren't good enough to, be on the same level as Eric and Klaus and the boys.
Right.
We were getting a lot of that vibe. And I think the first song, and I think I mentioned to you this before, I think was Sunday Bloody Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Was the first thing, and first night. And I think what the Phil Spector sound that you're referring to basically can come down to one thing, and that's tape echo. The tape echo was something that I think John kind of took from Phil as a producer and kind of made it his own at that point. If you look back and listen to that record, there's really a lot of tape echo and a lot of stuff like the drums and this and that. It was very heavily used. And I think that's what a lot of people might be equating, that, the Phil sound on that album was just really the tape echo. And I can remember them both, working for, 15, 20 minutes to get Roy Sakala, the engineer, to really nail that sound that they wanted. And that carried over into the other tracks for the whole album, really.
Okay.
And so as far as, Phil sitting down and at the board and tweaking in his sound, never happened.
Did he talk to any of the band members from Elephant's Memory during the sessions at all?
The first night was really rough, but as we got into Woman, he warmed up a little bit. I don't think he ever left the board to come out into the room, as he's famous for, and give people parts, or, what I mean, orchestrate or any kind of suggestions for our parts. He kind of gave us free. He could tell that John was giving us total freedom. So I guess in a roundabout way, he was giving us some respect, but we just couldn't all buy into it. He was really being that warm with us. And I don't think that was the reason that John sent him packing. I think it was something between them personally, that he just got sick of it. The gun and being totally stoned out every minute and this and that. I think they were, whether that went back to Abbey Road or I plus I don't know what their thing was at that point, but
right,
it wasn't good.
And yet he went back to him for the rock and roll sessions.
Yep, and
Go
that
figure.
was a disaster.
I still love those recordings. I love the ones Phil produced, and I love the ones that John was the producer.
I hear you.
But with Woman is the Negro of the World, which is a song that I love so much more now than I ever have. There's so much going on in that record. I love Stan's sax playing, which drives the whole song. But more than anything, I love that orchestration. And the fact that the song ends the way that it does, it's like suspended. We make her paint her face and dance, and you got all that orchestra build up going
Just
on.
an amazing arrangement.
I never heard a song end like that. And do you know if Phil had anything to do with that? And you have the invisible strings listed on this album. Who are the invisible strings?
Just session players. They just
Uh-huh.
put a name on it. That uh, I forget the contractor that got those people together. It wasn't Phil. It was just like a standard 802, local 802 guy that was
Uh-huh.
famous. Roy Sakala was probably the engineer at the record plant, was probably responsible for it.
Mm-hmm.
The time signature at the end of the song, it's 7/4. And I think that accentuates the classical orchestration point of it, the way it turns around the bars. It's 3/4/4/4 or whatever you want to think. And I just remember how we didn't hear the strings, of course, when we were laying down the basic tracks. That came a couple of days later. But I just remember looking over at John, and it's my most vivid memory of working with John is, sometimes when you do a session with some other musicians, and I was doing a lot of them back then, a lot of artists, Howard Tate on Atlantic, and just to name a few. I was working with Paul Simon at the time, Neil Sedaka. I'm dropping a few names here, but it's not
Heavy
like I
duty.
wasn't working with any famous people. But I can't ever remember having a connection with any of them like I had with John. At the end of that particular track you're referring to, that outro, we'll call it, Paint Your Face and Dance, is like John and I were situated in the studio where we were kind of side by side. But somehow when at the end of that intro, he kind of swiveled around, and from his seat, we were both standing, and we kind of ended up facing each other. And we did that whole outro that you're talking about. We just got eye contact, and we just jammed out through that last minute and 30 seconds of whatever it is on Woman. And it was just one of those moments that you just never forget. We just kind of vibed into each other, how musicians talk about they're playing with a vibe with each other. And we just caught that eye contact, and it's something I'll never forget. That was my most exciting track of the Sometime in New York City album by far.
Really? Huh. So who did the string arrangement for that song?
I can't recall. I think it was just a local 802 contractor.
But that was John's idea, though, to have the strings, right?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, he kept saying that I want to orchestrate it more because, and I maybe Phil recommended it. I really can't say, honestly. It could have been a Phil Spector recommendation, but seems like Phil would have done it himself, you know what I mean? Because he was certainly capable.
Unless John wanted him out that soon.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, there's other orchestration on the album, and I'm thinking about like Angela, for example. So, you don't know who did the arrangement for that?
Oh, it would be the same person, I'm sure. Whoever did that, they did all of them, because it was just that all was done in one day, as you would had to have done back then. You couldn't call those people in for two different sessions.
Would have cost too much.
Oh, yeah. Apple wouldn't have went for that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But the exciting thing about Angela, if you bring Angela up, is on quite a few of the tracks, people were sent home because there just wasn't, any real sax on, some stuff. And so Dan would get a break or this and that. But that particular night, and on several of the tracks, actually, it was just Jim Keltner, the drummer, and myself from the original Plastic Ono band. So that's Jim Keltner and I on Angela. And that was a real thrill because I don't know, it's hard to explain as a bass player, but when you get somebody like Jim Keltner sitting behind the drums, your whole perspective changes. I mean, it was just magical to me. And I've been doing sessions every day for years, So Angela was one of my favorites as far as bass and drums. If you just went and heard a naked mix of just the bass and drums, like, sometimes they'll just play the vocals back or whatever. If you just heard the bass and drums, it has to be the tightest I have ever played with anyone.
Oh, okay. Angela's one of those songs where, there's so many people that are not fans of Yoko and think that, the only thing that she ever did was scream,
Oh, good
on
Lord.
her records, which, depending upon how you want to interpret that, could be vocal improvisation too at the same time. But for those who can't tolerate her voice when she's screaming, there's so much great stuff that she sang on Sometime in New York City, and especially Approximately Infinite Universe, which we will get to. But what I like most of all about Angela is how well John and Yoko's voices blended together on that song. And it's not a loud Yoko, it's more restrained intentionally so that it's very balanced between John and Yoko's vocals. And I think that was really well done.
Oh, I totally agree, Ken. Good call. I mean, they were so tight on that. So they must have worked on it a good bit at the Dakota, to do that. Well, actually, back then, am I making a mistake there? Would they still have been at Bank Street? It's possible. Maybe they hadn't
Well,
made it.
they didn't move into the Dakota until 73.
Yeah. So they would have been at Bank Street, and it was a funny little place. It's like it had a bed and a TV.
That's it.
Yeah, it was about it. There was a little vestibule, and a little, like a small room where they would greet people or whatever. And it was like a studio apartment. It was teeny.
Mm.
And so I can just picture them. I was there several times, but I can imagine they probably had to rehearse that a lot. I mean, they were so tight on that track. That's one of the great things about that song, Angela, as well, is how amazingly tight they are. And they're Yoko would have to really, I mean, how could she just be a screamer to pull that off?
Mm-hmm.
Only a musician could get with John that tight and sing that track. I mean, they
Right.
just did a great job. I totally agree.
Just made me wish that they would sing more together and harmonize. I think
Yeah.
people would be far more impressed, and they'd give Yoko more of a chance if they heard that, I think.
Good point. Yeah, that would have been great. That's a great song.
Yeah,
You're
well,
right. There's a lot of good songs on that LP.
I love all the John stuff and many of Yoko's songs, one of which I've always been impressed with is Born in a Prison. Born in a Prison to me has like a soft jazz feel to it, which you could say the same thing on some of the stuff on Approximately Infinite Universe too. But yeah, and the sax playing on that is outstanding. And
I just wanted to say that that jazzy kind of touch we'd have to cite Stan Bronstein for that. I think that soft sax,
right?
It's like a breathing kind of sound that he got on that. Is not all sax players can pull that off. He was so versatile. He really had like 4 or 5 different type of sax sounds. He had that screaming rock and roll thing. He had that breathy kind of thing I describe it as you're pointing out on Born in a Prison, and but he was a heck of a jazz player. I mean, flat out jazz, as well as a Latin player, which is a whole other type of playing on tenor. He had played in the past, as I mentioned earlier, with so many greats. He had actually been in Tito Puente's band, the Latin V Tito Puente band, for a couple of years. And other Latin bands, Ray Barreto. And so he had a long history in playing Latin music as well as jazz. He had his own big band. And then as we're talking about his breathy quality on Born as a Prison, he was all over the map as far as saxophone players. Yeah, I don't know whether you'd have to be a saxophone player to appreciate it all, but as a musician, I certainly did. He was such an outstanding player.
I don't think you need to be a musician to appreciate his playing. He just had whatever was necessary, the right touch.
Exactly. Good point. Yes.
Yeah. So kind of compare what it's like working on a John song and working on a Yoko song during those sessions. You said earlier that John was very easy to work with. Did he know exactly what he wanted on his songs, or did he take ideas from the band as far as what to
He
play?
knew exactly what he wanted, but at the same time, he respected us. Well, I guess that's why he hired us.
Hmm.
He didn't want to have to be going running into the control room or back and forth trying to feed people parts and stuff. He knew we could handle it when he hired us. You know, I guess he
Right.
probably knew the night that we first played with him. And I think he did a lot of homework on us on the side. They looked up all of us individually. And, you know, I knew the first night that I went into the record plant, I overheard a conversation of John talking with Wayne Tex Gabriel about how he had spent a couple of years with Mitch Ryder in Detroit. And so I knew they knew all about us. You know, it wasn't just an accident. You know, he knew about my being in the house band at the Hit Factory with Jerry Ragavoy and that year. And, you know, I don't know whether he had actually talked to Paul Simon or not, but he knew about my couple of, you know, my work with Paul Simon, which was at that time, Paul was doing like a songwriting class at Columbia. And I had been with Columbia Records and the band Pig Iron that I mentioned previously.
Right.
So I don't know what kind of research they did, but they knew they could respect us and trust us to come up with parts. And we never had any problem coming up with parts because that's what we did all day long.
Well, that shows respect if they did research the band
Exactly.
members right there.
Yeah. Well, there weren't 1,000 bands around then, you know, we were pretty much the band in New York at the time, you know.
Right.
We invited them down to Max's Kansas City to play. They never made it, but when we were backing up Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley at the Anderson Theater one night, I looked out and there's John and Yoko in the fifth row. So that was pretty cool. They had come to check us out playing live.
And ironically, John and you guys got to play with Chuck on the Mike Douglas show.
Exactly.
That was something.
Yep.
Yeah. What did you think of? Because, you know, I love all the John stuff on the album, but John Sinclair is a favorite of mine. And I love John's playing on there, the slide guitar part. Did you watch him as he was doing that? What was that like?
Well, it was like I was about 6 feet away from him, and it was just him, Jim Keltner, and me. That was it. Another one that it's good that you choose the Jim Keltner ones because those are the exciting ones for me. But that was also the hardest one to do as a player because John kind of depended on you to be on automatic pilot to do that. You know, the parts where it goes, you got. It was like, how many times are we going to do you got to? That was the thing to figure it out. And yeah, and again, a tribute to Jim Keltner. But you really had to be on the ball. It was just a mental connection you had to have with that when we laid that track down. And I was just in awe of what he was doing on the slide guitar. That dobro was just unbelievable. But that was another one of my favorites. You're picking all my favorites.
We have the same taste, I guess. That's why we get along so well.
It was fun not having to deal with the rest of the elephants on a few things, you know, because that was good. And when we did the big production, Woman and Bloody Sunday, and the bigger productions when we were all kind of in the room playing, that was exciting in one aspect. But I love those ones where we paired off and it was just lesser, just Jim and myself and John, and of course Tex did some great slide playing himself on that.
Yeah. Was Luck of the Irish, was that a stripped down version of the band?
No, that was a pretty big one. And I mentioned that may have been another one that Phil might have been around a little on, but I just can't remember, Ken. I'm sorry. I just can't remember. But if I had my instincts are telling me that could be one of those.
Well, I hope if the box set does come out one of these days, there'll be information about every session. And just judging by what happened a couple of years ago with the Imagine box and a new one coming out soon on Plastic Ono, they're doing a great job. So I hope that it's something that's really thorough, and I'd love to hear lots of outtakes with you and John and Yoko. Yeah.
Well, you might maybe how you hear producers or engineers, they'll leave a little of the talk back on, so it would be revealing to hear Phil speak up and say a couple things. That might be a giveaway.
I'm really curious to know exactly what songs he stayed for, because if
I
he
know
was
you
only
are.
there
Wish I could be more helpful.
Yeah. Okay.
I didn't keep a personal track sheet, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah. When it came to Yoko songs, was John involved in any direction with those, or was Yoko completely in charge of those? On Sometime in New York City.
John was, I'm sorry?
On Sometime in New York City.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant Proximately Infinite.
No,
I'm sorry.
No.
Yeah, John was just really taking over that producer chair. Because Yoko would be out maybe working in the big room with Adam Ippolito, the keyboard player, and John would be firing back on the top thing with about that doesn't sound good or this and that. So he was definitely involved in the harmonic aspects, or what she was doing personally on her vocal or this and that. They had pretty strong back and forth going, the two of them.
Okay.
And always not so smooth. If Yoko didn't like what he was saying, she was going to let him hear about it, like I tell you.
Oh, I believe that. They're very outspoken people, and
oh yeah,
they're honest.
It went both ways.
Honest.
Let me put it like that.
So would you say then that John was more involved with the mixing and the sound, but the arrangement of the songs, of Yoko's songs, was that all Yoko, or did John
I'd say
something
I'm going to go with 50-50 on that, Ken. It was back and forth. They would sometimes take a 10-minute break and work out something about the arrangement, and they would just be side by side sitting at the control room, and we'd be taking a smoke break or whatever. There were some serious changes still going on at the last minute before we'd be laying some of that stuff down. And I specifically remember that about Sometime in New York City, because the whole thing was kind of on the fly a little, It was rough. We were just getting that stuff together. There was definitely some arrangement things being changed. And I just don't think it was there was any difference between his songs and hers so much, as it was just a co-production almost thing going on between the two of them right from the get-go.
I always kind of got the impression that with Yoko songs, it was a bit more freeform. Like she might let the band do what they felt like. Like what Stan wants to play on the sax, go ahead. And if it works, it works, like on Born in a Prison, something like that.
No, I don't think so on that album. That later that would be the case if we were talking about Approximately Infinite.
Okay.
That's more of the scenario for that album later on in the year, as it would be for Sometime in New York City. It was so rushed, so to speak, with Sometime, and I had to get Jackie Kennedy out of the way to lay down my bass track on a couple of things. You know what I mean? It was just so crazy. I mean, Rudolph Nureyev, the Secret Service agents with Jackie Kennedy Onassis right in the room as we're laying down tracks. I mean, this is not a normal way to make a record, It was crazy. Phil Spector. So
Well, something
crazy
like,
stuff.
yeah, when I think of like We're All Water, to me, that sounds like a very loose jam to me anyway. But you're
Yeah,
saying
you're
that
right. Yeah,
the album to you, Sometime in New York City, was far more structured, you think?
yeah, yeah, definitely. That's my take on it anyway.
Okay, hey, you were
Everybody
there.
has their opinion, I guess.
Would you say that John and Yoko were completely supportive of each other, or did you sense any kind of competitiveness between the two of them?
I wouldn't call it competitiveness. I would call it, they both had their stubborn streak. They had a little, they thought they had their minds made up, and suddenly they would just clash. And this session would kind of stop for 10 or 15 until they got it straight.
Hmm.
So all of was not well at the session. That's the kind of things that slowed it down somewhat, if you could call it slowed down. We're making a record a day. I mean, you went in at 7 o'clock and at the record plant, and Rick Frank would have been there early, and they probably may have spent an hour 15 getting the drum sound down. But by 7, you're learning a brand new song, and knowing is, well, I didn't know it the first couple of nights, but the MO was at 7 o'clock the next morning, you had a finished record.
Hmm.
That's pretty intense for a song you're just starting on. So we would take an hour or so to learn the song, and that's when those little I wouldn't call it a confrontation, but those little discussions that they would have, it would be about the arrangement, or who John would suggest, I want Tex to play the solo, and Yoko would say, no, let's have Stan do it, and that kind of stuff. Just normal production stuff, really.
Mm-hmm. But
But not done in advance. It was done right on the fly.
it was a collaboration between the two as
Oh,
producers.
definitely.
Yeah. Do you know? Because I remember hearing that during the double fantasy sessions, that the tapes were running at all times, all the outtakes. Did
That's what I
anything
meant
like
about
that? Did that
we
happen on
might be
Sometime in
able
New
to
York City?
figure out what tracks Phil was on, if that might divulge some of that stuff, because we might catch Phil chiming in on the talkback on a couple of tracks that I didn't even realize he was around on, but I don't remember him being around too much then.
But do you remember seeing tape machines going on at all times while you were rehearsing or doing outtakes? Or
Oh yeah, always.
good.
They would have every track, whether it was just the rehearsing or what. That tape that was gone, and they were recording. 16 track, I guess, at that point, right? Jeez, I don't
Oh
even
yeah,
remember that.
yeah. Were there any songs where the arrangements changed radically from start to finish that you can recall?
No, I can't recall anything like that,
Hmm.
where it was like a real drastic thing, like let's change the drum feel or anything like that. I guess John pretty much had an idea of what he wanted on there.
Okay. And
In terms of,
Luck of the Irish was always conceived as a duet.
yes,
Okay.
yep,
That's another favorite moment of mine on the album, because they do sound great together.
they really did. I mean, Angela says it all, right?
Right.
That was. I wish had been more of things to come. I mean, they kind of struck on something there, and it was. It's too bad, just the way the album, went and got panned, and it wasn't like it was a huge smash instantly and they had rushed back in to do another album or something.
Right. But we all know that because of the FBI investigating John and the Nixon administration wanting him deported, because of that, I think that brought an end to Elephant's memory working with him. And, my feeling is that if that never happened at all, if he wasn't hounded, and they weren't trying to deport him,
Right.
you think that he would have continued in the same direction with Elephant's memory? I mean, he also
Oh,
was affected by the sales, of Sometime in New York City, and something I hadn't realized until I spoke to you first about this, that the one-to-one concert was panned, you know, and that really affected John.
Hard to believe, isn't it? But
Yeah.
the truth. I mean, we had doubts about Sometime in New York City strictly because of the lyrics of "Woman is the Nigger." I mean, we knew starting out, Adam Ippolito. I remember him calling John aside, and Adam says, "John, are you really going to say that?" He was right. I mean, but John, he was just like didn't care. And he had his convictions, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
We were scared to death about it, and of course, it got banned right away. Because
Right.
we had just been through, as I explained earlier, having our record banned for the word dope. So, what's going to happen? I mean, we can see it coming.
I tell people still to this day, I have to be careful whether or not I play that song. All these
Really?
years later, yeah, I will
Yeah,
get
how many
feedback from
years?
a program director.
Exactly.
And there are songs that are out there that have profanity in them, and they seem to get accepted.
Right,
It's
exactly.
crazy. It's
I
absolutely
know, it
crazy.
really is. Yeah, that particular aspect of the whole thing is nuts.
Do you think that John was comfortable in the political arena? Talking about politics on TV and in his interviews and all, because I'm just reminded of, and you know this, the David Frost show, when there
Right.
was a couple in the audience and they were challenging John and Yoko over their song Attica State. And what are you doing sympathizing with the prisoners? They're criminals. Why are you defending them? And I could tell watching John there that he was a little uncomfortable. I mean, it was fascinating to see anybody challenge them.
I think that Yoko might have been the heavier of the two on a lot of the aspects of some of the nature of the songs. And she was really struck by some of the political stuff that I don't think John was as sensitive about, because, that's her song, man.
Right.
That was all her stuff. The woman's lib stuff was just coming in heavy, and she was hell bent on that stuff. I want to tell you, that was a stuff she was. You could tell she could tell that she had stronger convictions in some of the lyrics than John did at that point, because they were her lyrics.
Yeah.
New York City was totally John.
Right.
You can tell that was just his take on the whole excitement about being in New York. And was some, Attica State, I remember how affected she was by the whole thing, because we sat around and talked about the whole thing, because this stuff was going down as we were recording it almost. This stuff would have just been in the news a matter of days ahead.
That must have made it even more exciting, the immediacy of it all.
It was wild. In a lot of ways, I couldn't even get my head around it, because I was too, obsessed with, am I going to be playing the right part? Am I choosing? This is a Lennon song, for God's sake. You were so worried about, as a studio player, am I going to do my thing and get a good representation? I'm worried about what compressor they're using on the bass, stuff like that. I'm not really worried about the lyrics that much. So we had a lot going on personally as players. Just, my God, we're on first, we just met the guy a month ago and we're recording his songs here.
Yeah.
It was intense. I remember calling Adam up, or Adam would call me, Adam Ippolito, the keyboard player. He would call me like at 5 o'clock in the morning and say, "Do we still have the gig?" I mean, we were in disbelief half the time, worrying about whether we're going to get a call that we're not, doing well enough, and they're bringing Klaus and Eric back.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
The,
in a way, 1972, you had "I Am Woman" as a #1 song from Helen Reddy,
Right,
same
right.
year.
Helen Reddy.
Well, John and Yoko had a different way of conveying the same message.
Right, exactly.
One
Well,
was
you
a
can say
hit.
that again.
Yeah.
I don't think Helen Reddy had to take out the back page of the New York Times to explain,
Uh-huh.
his usage of the word or anything.
Right. It's fascinating to me, this whole period, and I'm always reminded of, before John died, he made a statement, "What was I doing giving Jerry Rubin a free lunch?" And
Oh,
he made it sound like, his political activism was a result of feeling guilty for all of his commercial success. So I'm wondering if, from what you observed from John, was he extremely passionate and gung-ho about everything that he wrote about? Was Yoko more a force in this than John? How do you
I
look
think
at it?
you're hitting on it. And I think my take on it is Yoko would have been the stronger of the two. But hey, nobody had a gun in John's back. I mean, he was into it.
Hmm.
They really hit it off with Jerry Rubin and all those people. And when they went out to the Midwest to get together with John Sinclair, I think that really helped John solidify a lot of his views at the time. So there were a lot of input from people like John Sinclair and and that whole Abby Hoffman thing, and
Sure.
where they were really trying to they really wanted John to get involved in helping the 18-year-old sign up to vote. That was the big deal. They thought they could beat Nixon with, just
Sure.
sheer numbers, I guess. So that's really the backdrop for what they wanted John for. They had ulterior motives. So not that it was malicious or anything, but they loved John, but they really were hell bent on getting him involved in the big crusade for the voting age and getting people to sign up. That was the whole thing. So I think John got a little swept up on that. He was kind of flattered by it. As I remember talking with him about it, and he said, "Yeah, let's get into this." It's not like he had his mind made up years in advance. It was just a thing he was getting swept up in.
Right. Well, I have no doubt that he was a peacenik above
Oh,
everything. He
definitely.
and Yoko, but it's another thing to write all the other songs that he wrote about Attica State and supporting Angela Davis, who of course was cleared, of her charges and everything. And John Sinclair was released actually before the
Yeah,
song was released on
exactly.
Sometime in New York City, like right after
Yeah,
the benefit for John Sinclair. But
right.
yeah, it's a fascinating period, and I admire people that write political songs. I'm not one of those people that separate, what are you doing in politics? You should just be an entertainer. If people
Right.
feel passionately about something, they should be able to express it. But that's me.
Well, today, I mean, a lot of that stuff could hold up today in a lot of different ways.
Hmm.
We can't avoid politics today. I mean, and a lot of the subject matter of a lot of that stuff could be applied today.
Hmm.
Black Lives Matter. We could go on and on and on. I mean,
Right.
a lot of that stuff is pertinent today.
In fact, I don't know if you followed, there was recently a compilation, Give Me Some Truth, where John's solo stuff was remixed. And the only song from Sometime in New York City that they put in there, ironically, was Angela. And
Yeah, I
you would
was
think,
thrilled.
yeah, you would think automatically New York City,
Right,
something
right.
like that, or even Woman is the Nigger of the World because it was a single. But do you listen to remixes? Because Sometime in New York City was also remixed in 2005, I think the year was. Do you pay attention to that?
I always listen, but I try not to take it too crazy because, uh, a lot of it has to do with what playback system you have at the time.
True.
In the old days, I had killer stuff these days, the way that, all the MP3 stuff and this and that, I can't get in that involved. I mean, how do you know what you're really dealing with? Was it, I always get into the technical thing, what compressors are going on, all MP3s sound compressed to me, which they are. And it just gets too crazy technically to me to really go, wow, yeah, they really nailed that new mix. I don't get swept up too much in it, Ken.
Okay. Yeah. Well, production is something that matters to a lot of people, and in all the podcast shows that I do, when you analyze music today, there are some people who will look at some recordings from the past, and I hear it all the time with some of the solo Beatles stuff that it sounds too muddy, needs to be cleaned up, blah, blah, blah. You hear that a lot.
Yeah.
Were you happy with the production of Sometime in New York City when it first came out?
I was at the time, but now as I go back and hear it, I wish they would have lightened up on the tape echo a little bit.
Huh.
But it's so distinctive. I mean, it would probably be weird not to have it now. I'm so used to the old, the original sound of it. That's just, nobody does that on records anymore,
Mm-hmm.
You hit the drum and it's like, like so many repeats going on, But that's just something I think, as I said earlier, I think that's something John got from Phil, and that was just, that's just not on Sometime in New York City. That's, there's quite a bit of tape go on a lot of the other stuff that he was doing.
Even in the Beatle days, he was very insecure about his voice, and he always wanted it doctored up. And that's,
he always had to have the tape echo on when he was putting his tracks down. I'm sure you've heard that before. He couldn't sing anything dry. He would freak out on the engineer. I remember stepping in to do background vocals on one of Yoko's tunes, and it was just Adam, John, and myself, and we're standing there putting the phones on in the small booth trying to get, and John heard his voice back dry, and he practically freaked out.
Oh.
He just was not into it. He just demanded that echo,
What song was that? Do you remember?
Oh, no, I can't remember.
Was it on Sometime in New York City or one of?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I just thought that was funny at the time. Wow, I didn't realize, it got me thinking, holy crap, he's got to have that echo on just to do anything. I just thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, it's an ongoing issue. If an artist is very sensitive, as John was about his voice, do you remix albums now and play with his voice or have less reverb, or you don't know actually if John was alive today if he might have a different opinion altogether.
You're true. Absolutely right. Who knows?
We only know how we felt.
I had a chance to find out.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, I wanted to talk to you about Yoko's album, but we've already gotten to an hour here.
Really?
Our interview.
That flew by.
Which tells you that this could be 3 parts.
Could be, so much, and that's fine with me. It's because you're such a good interviewer is the reason.
I just want you to talk because you can, it's there's nothing more important to me. I love talking to Beatle authors, but the people who work in the studio with them, they have an angle there. They have observances that none of us have. And it's learning the craft, it's learning them in the studio, what they were like. And also in this case, because John and Yoko were partners, you got to know what their relationship was like in the studio. So you were a part of that for several years. So
I was very fortunate, wasn't I?
Oh,
very,
yes.
Very blessed.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is our next interview with you, which will be very soon, probably a week. We'll talk about approximately Infinite Universe. We still have to talk about the TV appearances that you had with Elephant's Memory and John and Yoko, and the one-to-one concert, and the Elephant's Memory album, their one and only album on Apple. And will that ever come out?
the still hidden Elephant's Memory album, still not available on CD. Just
Yeah.
unbelievable.
You know, when I listen to it, it's on this cassette.
Ah,
That's the only way I can listen to it right now. But
that's exactly right.
I hope that some record company picks it up or Apple does something about it. But
Me
we'll talk.
too.
We'll talk about that later.
I can't predict what the suits at Apple are going to do ever. I'm totally mystified by the whole thing, or what's left of Apple. I
I
probably
don't know.
mentioned to you that I was, for years, I thought Yoko owned it and she didn't want to mess with it.
Hmm.
So I got so fed up with that. One year I just called her up and asked her.
Yeah.
She doesn't own it. Apple still owns it.
Is there anybody at Apple that you can ask? Why is it being held back?
All my connections at Apple have retired and have moved on. It's all new, young guys. You know, I can't get any response from anybody. Nobody seems to care. You know, I thought maybe I stood a chance, you know, when they did all those re-releases. It's probably been over a year ago now.
You don't mean the
They
Apple
pretty much,
box. You don't mean that. You don't mean the Apple
no,
box
it's when
set.
those two brothers that were on Apple, what were
Oh,
their names?
Lon and Derek
Around
Von
that
Eaton.
time, you know, I
Yeah,
thought if
yeah.
they made it that down the list to that stuff, surely they're going to get the Elephant stuff out there. So there could be a technical reason too, Ken. I'm not really sure, you know, because a lot of the Capitol masters were held in that vault in Fort Lee that burned.
Oh, God.
So, you know, I just don't know. It's a mystery still to this day.
It's a part of history, and we should have it out there no matter what. Not just because it's you and Elephant's Memory, but John produced it, and
That's my point on it.
you know,
It's a production of John's, for goodness sake.
yeah,
It deserved, and I, you know, I ran into Jack Douglas and at the thing in Central Park when they were promoting the Lennon NYC
right.
movie on PBS,
Mhm.
which I was fortunate enough to be a part of.
It's
They had that
special.
big thing and that big opening in Central Park. There were 150,000 people or whatever there to see the opening and watch the film. And I sat right across the aisle from Jack Douglas. And I says, Jack, what's the story? When are they going to re-release the Elephants album? And, you know, he says, you know, I've talked to Yoko about it and it's on the list. And so what does that mean? That was 10 years ago, wasn't it?
Mm,
That's a slow moving list.
yeah. Well, I spoke with Jack Douglas, it's got to be like 2 years ago now, about the one-to-one concert, because there are plans in the works to reissue that.
Well, that's
You
what
know,
he was talking about as well.
yeah.
That was the main one that I was asking about, but I also said, and the Elephants album. And his answer was, she's been talking about it. So that's all I got.
But I'd have to figure that once a year something will come out. You know, just
Yeah,
like
that's
this
kind of
year.
her MO, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
If you're gonna go by 50th anniversaries, even though the Imagine box set wasn't the 50th anniversary, and Plastic Ono would have been December last year, but because of COVID, it's been delayed. But we'll have Plastic Ono coming out in a few months from now, probably. And I would think if they're going to do things chronologically, sometime in New York City, hopefully next year,
it's
and
true.
one-to-one package. It'd be nice to
I
put it
would
all
hope
together.
so. I would hope so. That sounds like a good package, right?
Mm. Get me on the board.
All right.
I'll work on it.
Hope
All right.
so.
So if anyone's interested, I've interviewed Gary a number of times, and there's another interview that you can listen to that I've done with him. If you're like me and you just can't get enough of Gary, you can go to my website, which is kenmichaelsradio.com, and you will find him on my interviews pages there. So some of the same stuff that we talked about, but different questions, and you will get a barrel full of Elephant's Memory if you listen to our interviews with me and Gary. And we'll do another one, like I said, very soon, probably next week, and we'll resume it then. So thanks so much, Gary. And thanks to all of you for watching. And we'll see you very soon.
Thank you so much, Ken. We're going to fade to black.
All right. See you next time, guys.
Thank you.